You wake up, and the first thing you feel is shame. Not the alarm, not the sunlight creeping through the curtains, but that heavy, suffocating shame that sits on your chest like a weight you can't move. You promised yourself last night would be different. You swore this time you'd stop. You made deals with God, with yourself, with anyone who might be listening. And yet here you are again, waking up to the same wreckage, the same disappointment, the same version of yourself you can't seem to escape. Your body feels hollowed out. Your mind races with justifications and excuses that sound weaker every time you repeat them. You look in the mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. When did your eyes lose that light? When did this thing that was supposed to help you cope become the very thing destroying you? The addiction doesn't even feel good anymore. It's not pleasure, it's not relief. It's just something you do because not doing it feels impossible. You've tried willpower, you've tried moderation, you've tried white-knuckling your way through cravings that feel like they're tearing you apart from the inside. And every time you fail, the shame grows deeper, the self-hatred becomes more vicious, the belief that you're broken beyond repair gets stronger. But what if everything you've been told about addiction is missing the most crucial piece? What if your struggle isn't a moral failure or a lack of discipline, but actually your psyche's desperate attempt to communicate something you haven't been able to hear? Carl Jung understood something about addiction that most people still don't grasp. He saw it not as weakness, but as a misguided spiritual thirst, a soul crying out for meaning in the only language it knows. And once you understand what your addiction is really trying to tell you, everything changes. This isn't another lecture about willpower or another 12-step platitude. This is about seeing your struggle through eyes that can finally make sense of it. Jung said that every addiction starts as a search for the divine in the wrong place. You're not weak, you're not broken. You're spiritually starving in a world that offers you everything except what your soul actually needs. Think about when it started. Really think about it. Before the habit became a prison, there was a moment when whatever you're addicted to actually worked. It filled something, it quieted something, it made you feel a way you desperately needed to feel. Maybe it made you feel confident when you felt invisible. Maybe it numbed pain you didn't have the tools to process. Maybe it gave you permission to be someone you couldn't be sober. That first time, that first taste of relief, it wasn't a mistake. It was your psyche finding a solution to a problem you didn't even know you had. The tragedy isn't that you sought relief. The tragedy is that the relief was false, a counterfeit of what you truly needed. And your soul knew it, even if your conscious mind didn't. Addiction is what happens when we reach for the shadow of something real and convince ourselves the shadow is enough. Your unconscious mind is brilliant and ruthless. It will do whatever it takes to get your attention, to force you to face what you're avoiding, to drag you toward the growth you're resisting. And if you won't listen to whispers, it will scream. Addiction is the scream. Every craving is your psyche trying to tell you something. Every relapse is a message you haven't decoded yet. You think you're fighting against yourself, but you're actually fighting to stay small, to stay safe, to avoid the terrifying work of becoming who you actually are. The substance, the behavior, the compulsion, it's all just a symptom. The real addiction is to staying unconscious. You're addicted to not knowing yourself. You're addicted to avoiding the parts of you that feel too painful, too shameful, too overwhelming to face. Jung called this the shadow. Everything about yourself you've rejected, denied, buried in the basement of your psyche. And your addiction, it's the basement door rattling, begging you to open it. Most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow. They build elaborate defense mechanisms, create false identities, numb themselves into oblivion, anything to avoid confronting the parts of themselves they've deemed unacceptable. But here's the paradox Jung understood so deeply. The things you're most afraid to face are often the very things that hold your power, your creativity, your authenticity. The parts of you that you've locked away aren't just wounds and weakness. They're also your unrealized potential, your unlived life, the fullness of who you were meant to be before the world taught you to shrink. Your addiction has become the guard at that basement door. It keeps you from going deeper. It keeps you surface level, manageable, controllable. It's protection that's become a prison. And the cruel irony is that the more you try to fight the addiction directly, the stronger it becomes, because you're still not addressing what it's protecting you from. You can't defeat an enemy you don't understand. And you've been treating your addiction as an enemy when it's actually been a messenger, a terrible, destructive messenger, but a messenger nonetheless. Think about what you're really craving when the urge hits. Is it really the substance or behavior itself? Or is it the feeling you associate with it, the escape, the numbness, the permission, the false sense of control? You're not addicted to alcohol or drugs or sex or food or screens. You're addicted to the temporary relief from being yourself, from feeling what you feel, from carrying what you carry. You're addicted to a few hours of not having to be conscious. And consciousness is exactly what Jung says we need most. Not the punishment of awareness, but the liberation of it. Here's what almost no one tells you about addiction. The path out isn't through more control, it's through less resistance. Not surrender to the addiction, but surrender to yourself, to the totality of who you are, including the parts that terrify you. Jung's entire approach to healing was based on integration. Bringing what's unconscious into consciousness, befriending your shadow rather than banishing it, finding wholeness not through perfection, but through accepting your brokenness as part of your humanity. This doesn't mean giving up or giving in. It means stopping the war with yourself long enough to understand what's actually happening. Your addiction isn't happening to you. It's happening for you, trying to show you where you're cut off from yourself, where you're living out of alignment, where you've abandoned your own soul. Every compulsion is pointing toward a need that isn't being met. Every craving is highlighting a void that needs to be filled with something real. The work isn't to eliminate the need. The work is to find what actually satisfies it. Jung had a famous exchange with the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, where he essentially said that the only thing that could cure a spiritual thirst was a spiritual experience. Not religion necessarily, but connection to something greater than yourself, a sense of meaning and purpose that makes your life feel worth living fully rather than escaping constantly. Most addiction treatment focuses on behavior modification. Stop doing the thing. Replace it with something healthier. Use coping strategies, and yes, those things matter, but if you don't address the spiritual void, the existential emptiness, the disconnection from your authentic self, you're just trading one compulsion for another or living in constant deprivation that feels like slow death. You need to understand what your soul is actually hungry for. And I can tell you right now, it's not what your addiction offers. What if I asked you to pause right now and think about the last time you felt truly alive? Not the artificial high of your addiction, but genuinely present, connected, purposeful, like your life meant something and you weren't just surviving it. Can you remember? And if you can't, doesn't that tell you everything you need to know about what's really wrong? This isn't about judging you or making you feel worse. This is about recognizing that you've been starving and trying to fill that hunger with things that can never satisfy it. You wouldn't keep going back to poison if you had access to real nourishment. The fact that you keep choosing what's destroying you means you don't believe anything better is possible for you. And that belief, that deep unconscious conviction that this is as good as it gets, that's the real addiction. I want you to comment below and tell me this. Say, I'm ready to stop running from myself. Just that sentence, I'm ready to stop running from myself, because when you declare that, even just by typing it out, you're making a commitment that goes deeper than willpower. You're acknowledging that the fight isn't against the substance or behavior. It's against the unconsciousness that made you need it in the first place. And maybe, for the first time, you're admitting that staying unconscious is more painful than waking up. Say it. I'm ready to stop running from myself. And when you comment that, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping everyone else who's reading this and feeling the same shame, the same exhaustion, the same desperate need to finally be honest. You're creating permission for others to stop pretending they have it all together. That's the beginning of real transformation, the moment you stop hiding. So comment those words right now. I'm ready to stop running from myself. Let's continue. Jung said that neurosis, which includes addiction, is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Read that again. Your addiction is a substitute for legitimate suffering. You've been choosing the suffering of addiction because you're terrified of the suffering that would come from actually facing yourself, grieving what needs to be grieved, feeling what needs to be felt, changing what needs to be changed. Legitimate suffering has meaning. It transforms you. It deepens you. It connects you to your humanity and to something greater than yourself. The suffering of addiction is circular and meaningless. It just repeats, getting worse each time, teaching you nothing except that you're powerless and pathetic. But you're not powerless. You're just suffering in the wrong direction. Think about what you've been avoiding. What emotions feel too big to handle? What truths about your life feel too painful to acknowledge? What version of yourself are you terrified to become because it would require you to change everything? Your addiction is keeping you from those questions. It's a very effective avoidance strategy, and part of you knows that if you stopped, if you actually got sober and stayed sober, you'd have to face the life you've been running from. The failed relationships, the wasted potential, the person you've become versus the person you thought you'd be, the emptiness that was there before the addiction and will still be there after unless you do something radically different. That's terrifying. It's easier to stay numb. But here's what Jung would tell you. That terror you're avoiding, it's also your liberation. On the other side of what you're most afraid to face is the life you've been looking for in all the wrong places. The connection, the meaning, the sense of self, the feeling that you matter and your life has purpose. All of it is on the other side of legitimate suffering. But you have to be willing to walk through it instead of around it. This is where most people give up. They hear that recovery requires facing pain, and they think, I can't do that. I'm not strong enough. I'll fall apart. And maybe you will fall apart. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Jung talked about the necessity of psychological death before rebirth. You can't become who you're meant to be while clinging to who you've been. The false self, the addict identity, the version of you that's been surviving on coping mechanisms and avoidance, that version has to die. And yes, that's painful. Yes, it feels like you're losing yourself, but you're only losing the prison. The real you, the authentic self that's been buried under shame and fear and addiction, that self is waiting to emerge. And it can't emerge until you stop protecting the false version. Your addiction has been protecting a fragile sense of self that was never real to begin with. You built an identity around your wounds, your traumas, your limitations. You started believing, I'm an addict, this is who I am, this is all I'll ever be. But that's not true. That's just the story you've been telling yourself because it felt safer than admitting you have no idea who you are without the addiction. Jung would say you're suffering from a poverty of soul, a disconnection from the self with a capital S, that deeper, truer essence of who you are beneath all the conditioning and trauma and fear. The self isn't something you create, it's something you uncover. And the uncovering requires you to strip away everything that isn't really you, including the addiction that's been masquerading as your identity. This is spiritual work disguised as recovery. You're not just quitting a substance or behavior, You're excavating your soul. You're asking the most fundamental question a human can ask, which is, who am I really, and what am I here to do that matters? And your addiction can't answer that question. It can only keep you from asking it. So what do? How do you actually begin? You start by telling the truth, not the edited version, not the story that makes you look better or more in control. The whole ugly truth about what this addiction has cost you, what it's taken from you, who you've become because of it. Write it down if you have to. Say it out loud to someone you trust, or just say it to yourself in the mirror. But tell the truth. Jung said that the unconscious becomes conscious through confession. The things you keep hidden in shame have power over you. The moment you bring them into the light, into language, into acknowledgement, they begin to lose their grip. Shame thrives in secrecy. It dies in honesty. And your addiction has been fueled by shame for so long that you probably can't even remember what it feels like to be honest about your struggle without collapsing into self-hatred. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop hating yourself for being an addict is the moment you can start actually changing. Self-hatred isn't motivation. It's just more poison. You've been trying to shame yourself into sobriety, and it doesn't work because shame is what drove you to addiction in the first place. You can't heal a shame-based wound with more shame. You heal it with radical acceptance of where you are right now, not as a destination, but as a starting point. You accept that, yes, this is where I am, this is what I've done, this is who I've been. And from that place of acceptance, you can ask a different question. Not why am I such a failure, but what is my soul trying to tell me through this struggle? If your addiction could speak, what would it say? What need is it trying to meet? What pain is it trying to soothe? What part of you is it trying to protect? Jung used a technique called active imagination, where you dialogue with aspects of your psyche as if they were separate beings with their own wisdom. You could do this with your addiction. Sit quietly, close your eyes, and ask it directly. Why are you here? What do you want from me? What are you protecting me from? And then listen, not with your rational mind that wants to analyze and dismiss, but with your intuitive mind that knows things you haven't consciously admitted yet. You might be surprised by what comes up. Your addiction might say, I'm protecting you from feeling unloved. I'm protecting you from the terror of being seen as you really are. I'm protecting you from the rage you've never let yourself express. I'm protecting you from the grief of everything you've lost. And suddenly it's not an enemy anymore. It's a misguided protector, a part of you that's been trying to help in the only way it knows how. And when you can see it that way, with compassion rather than contempt, you can start to say, thank you for trying to protect me, but I don't need this kind of protection anymore. I'm ready to find another way. That shift in relationship with your addiction changes everything. You're no longer at war with yourself. You're negotiating with different parts of yourself, honoring what they were trying to do while choosing a different path forward. Jung also talked about the importance of finding your myth, the larger story that gives your life meaning beyond just personal survival and comfort. What's the myth you're living? Right now, if you're deep in addiction, your myth is probably something like, I'm cursed, or I'm broken, or I'm being punished. Those are victim myths. They keep you small and powerless. But what if you could choose a different myth? What if your story wasn't, I'm an addict who keeps failing, but I'm a soul on a hero's journey who's facing the greatest challenge of my life and discovering strength I didn't know I had? What if this struggle is actually the initiation into the person you're meant to become? Every hero's journey includes a descent into darkness, a confrontation with the shadow, a symbolic death and rebirth. That's not poetic metaphor. That's the actual structure of transformation. You're in the descent right now. The darkness of addiction is your underworld. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, it feels like you might not make it out. But you will if you stop fighting the journey and start learning from it. What is this darkness teaching you? What are you discovering about yourself that you could never have learned in comfort and control? Addiction strips away all your illusions. It shows you exactly how much you've been lying to yourself, how fragile your ego really is, how little control you actually have. And that's devastating, but it's also liberating. Because once you stop pretending, once you admit you're not in control and you never were, you can finally ask for help. Not just human help, though that matters too, but help from something greater, whether you call that God or the universe or your higher self or the collective unconscious. Jung believed that true healing required connection to the numinous, to the sacred dimension of existence that reminds you you're part of something infinitely larger than your individual struggle. If you're tired of letting addiction ruin your life, you need to start building a life worth being sober for. That's not a cliche, that's the actual work. Your addiction filled a void. If you remove the addiction without filling the void with something real, you'll either relapse or you'll become a miserable, dry drunk who's technically sober but spiritually dead. What would make your life feel worth living? What would make you want to wake up in the morning with purpose instead of dread? What connections? What work? What creative expression? What service to others? What relationship with the divine? What does your soul actually long for? And don't say you don't know. You do know. You've just been afraid to admit it because it would require you to change, to risk, to be vulnerable in ways that feel impossible. But the truth is, you've been risking everything on your addiction. You've been vulnerable to the worst possible outcomes: jail, death, complete destruction of everything you care about. If you can risk that, you can risk building something real. You can risk showing up authentic and imperfect. You can risk letting people see the real you, not the performed version. You can risk pursuing meaning even if you fail, because at least if you fail while trying to build a real life, you'll learn something. If you fail while trapped in addiction, you just keep repeating the same hell over and over. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because what we're building here is a community of people who are done pretending, done performing, done settling for half-lived lives. We're choosing consciousness even when it hurts. We're choosing growth even when it's terrifying, and we're doing it together because no one transforms in isolation. Here's the final thing Jung would want you to understand. Your addiction isn't your destiny. It's not a life sentence. It's a chapter, a painful, necessary chapter that's been teaching you something essential about yourself and about what it means to be human. But it's not the end of your story. You get to write what comes next. And yes, you'll have to earn that next chapter through the hardest work you've ever done. You'll have to face the shadow, grieve the lost years, rebuild your life from the ground up, learn to trust yourself again even after you've betrayed yourself 1,000 times. You'll have to sit with cravings that feel like they're going to kill you. You'll have to feel emotions you've been numbing for years. You'll have to become someone you've never been before. But you can do this. Not because you're strong, but because your soul is stronger than any addiction. Not because you have willpower, but because you have something more powerful, a longing for wholeness that won't be satisfied with anything less than your full, authentic life. The divine spark in you, the self that Jung talked about, it's been waiting for you to stop running. It's been calling you home through every craving, every relapse, every moment of despair. It's been saying, come back to yourself. Come back to what's real. Come back to the life you were meant to live. And now, right now, you're finally ready to listen. You're tired enough, broken enough, desperate enough to try something different. And that desperation is actually grace. It's your soul's way of saying, we've gone as far as we can go in this direction. It's time to turn around. So turn around. Face yourself. Face the darkness. Face the legitimate suffering that will actually transform you instead of destroying you. And on the other side of that facing, you'll find something you never expected. Not perfection, not a life without struggle, but a life that finally feels like yours. A life you're present for, a life that means something, a life worth protecting instead of escaping. You've done enough running. You've done enough numbing. You've done enough pretending. Now, it's time to do the real work. It's time to come home to yourself. And when you do, you'll realize that everything you were searching for, in the addiction, the peace, the connection, the sense of belonging, the feeling that you're enough, all of it was inside you the whole time. You just had to become conscious enough to find it.